Good morning. We're very, very punctual, being incredibly German here. It's not even 11, so thank you all so much for coming here. We are honored and excited to listen to a conversation that has been ongoing, I believe, since 2018 between Janaina Tschäpe and Doris von Drathen. The two met these quite almost 8 years ago now, and as I understand, you have been talking since then about art and life and work, and we will hear more. Doris von Drathen is originally German art historian who taught in New York and lives in Paris. In 2004, she published The Vortex of Silence, and in 25, Doris and Janaina published a wonderful book that you can find over there as well, that contains some of their conversation, and it's such a privilege to be able to listen to you continue that conversation for us today. Thank you very much.
Should I start? Okay, I might start with the beginning of a love story. And I think from a love story, the beginning is always the most exciting moment. So in fact, I came from long years of working together with Rebecca Horn, 25 years, and with Pat Steer, and also with Kunelis. And in fact, I had to realize that I needed artists who would, in the contrary, survive me, so that I could stop going to the cemetery. In this purpose, on this research, I went to my favorite gallery in New York, Sean Kelly, and I looked around. And I fell into the exhibition of Janaina, and I fell into her paintings, but literally. I fell in her space, in her pictorial space. And I was like electrified. Because in this pictorial space, you can see a paradox or even a huge contrast. You see like the depths and the wide space of Northern painting, of the tradition of Caspar David Friedrich, of Runge, of Corinth, of Nolde. All their technique, Kirkeby, not to talk about, all these guys who had invented how to open a space only by the different and multiple layers of the grounding of a painting. But at the same time, you see the flying, dancing line, flying above that space, and flying from one impulse to another. So that was, for me, like a completely enigma. And I turned around in the gallery, and I found the son of Sean Kelly's, Tom Kelly, and I asked him, listen, what is happening here? Who is that artist? And he told me right away the secret, that you had done your studies in Hamburg. So I discovered that two things. One, that my gaze was not completely wrong. And on the other, also that there was something out there who was Brazilian, and at the same time shared a culture with my culture. And so I said to Tom, listen, I have to meet that artist, and the best would be immediately. I was in the gallery in the morning at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I had my meeting with Janaina. And there we started. And I could ask you all the questions. And what was the immense pleasure was that there was like you as a Brazilian artist who had like an immense pleasure to express yourself finally in German. And coming from Paris, I had the same pleasure also to speak German with you and to find all these kind of very differentiating terms what you have and what we translated thoroughly in our book. And the translator came today, Richard Elliott, who is here. And so that is in fact the heartbeat of the conversation. But there's not only a conversation, there's also an essay with some reflections. And I think I would go today to all what is new here, because first we have to congratulate Janaina. All the works on the wall are from this year. Can you imagine what that means for an artist? That is amazing what you did. And what I feel is there is what is new, what you see in a very condensed form up there with the watercolor, which is called sopro, souffle, atem, breathing. There you see that movement. And now it's your turn.
Well, hi, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Well, yes, so it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to do this conversation. And just jumping in about the work upstairs, the watercolors. For me, the watercolors are always a way to sort of condensely, as you say, think of the work and think of the space I want to create with the work, and especially about the movement, as you say, because for me, the hand is kind of an extension of the brain, and when I paint and I like the large scale, as you see, it's always also about moving and trying to understand how my movement will affect the painting and the space that I create. And the watercolors, sopro, is basically like it's watercolor on wet paper, so kind of you're trying to understand, for me, how water, it's like trying to juxtapose my movement and imposing my movement on a paper that is wet, which has its own life. So obviously you try to, in a way, calculate a little bit how the water is going to absorb the paint and move the paint. But in a way, it's this dialogue that is interesting because it does put a layer of chance in it. So it's a play a little bit with the movement, the chance, the thinking of a space, and sometimes a landscape, but I think landscape more in the idea of trying to understand how wind moves, how water moves, and translating that into movement.
But you also did the performances in water, like a serene. You were like diving in the water and you spent time underwater. So I always thought that the watercolors are linked to your performance.
Absolutely. I think also, when I did the performances underwater, I created costumes that were quite large, voluminous fabric costumes that would then move in the water. So it was in a way a very similar approach to the way I now place the paint with the movement in the water. At that time, I would, place the fabric in the water so that the stream or the movement of the water would move the fabric without me controlling it absolutely. So it was always kind of a little bit that discussion and the meeting of chance and control in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and here we are. Because that was exactly what reminded me of Rebecca Horn and also of Pat Steer. Pat Steer, who came from the school, in fact, of of accepting the chance. And Rebecca Horn, who were like working spiritually with the nearly electrically charged space. That was all in your paintings and also in your watercolors and also in your performance in a certain way. Something came together there. Do you want to go on there?
Yeah, I think that that's kind of the relationship that is ongoing. It's always to kind of create another layer of challenge in that discussion about chance and control. So I think that in this body of work here, like for me, the idea is always to think of another layer of difficulty in a way so that I can make a mistake because it's a new, layer of something that I'm trying out. And through the mistakes, I kind of try to approach, where that meeting point is and where that balance could be of control and chance. And it's kind of a love affair between those two that keep me pushing sort of boundaries and trying to layer one more thing again and again to widen up the space of painting.
Yeah, and still in this love affair, there is a new, let's say, a new wind. A new breathing, as we said, upstairs. And also here, a new wind. Is this enough to
Yeah, no, I think that
reflect?
with this body of work, I started to also try to understand what it is to deal with the mark making, but also with the idea of erasing the mark making. So that, sometimes the drawing comes before or after a first layer. So I think that I started to draw before the first layer here, while in the past, like I would do a first layer and then draw and then erase and then maybe accumulate more layers on top. And I started here to try to understand how it would be to erase marks and to live with the ghost of some marks and what is left of that, and how can I embed that in the discussion further of layering more information on it, but still keeping sort of the movement in my head.
Yeah, but this movement is very special, no? Let's look to this painting, the Wolkendunkel, because there you see it above, and we might look to it together. I have the feeling to see like the trace of the wind. How can you do that with the brush?
Well, I think for me that's kind of the idea. The idea of landscape is actually not it's more the idea of what happens in landscape, what happens in nature, the wind and the water and the storm and the movement. So, like if you think of clouds, if you think of how clouds gather together, or it's all about the accumulation of all that temperature that kind of rises and then something starts. And I think that that thought creates a movement already. Because as I said, I really believe that physically, like when we think, we express physically the thought. And I express it with moving and thinking of it. And here, as you see the layering, there is mark making underneath, and then there is sort of a trying to raise or trying to move the paint in the space and create a gesture that embeds that idea and that trace again, and then layer it again and sort of try to understand how drawing, how the brush, how they all can sort of live in a same space and in a same movement as well.
So that the movement of the hand paints with the experience of wind in a certain way.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what it is. I think that the constant thinking like of how things move, how the wind moves or how the water moves, and painting is for me all about the accumulation of those experiences, and then you don't really think about it anymore. You sort of express it as you go. And I like painting in large scale also because it lets me, you know, sort of think of movement as creating a space and having that physical space to do it.
Yeah, and that's, may I come back to Sopro? Because that was so amazing for me in Sopro, because what I saw was like a vortex of airy movement. Like the sopro of like the breathing and the vortex of the breathing. I think that, and I'm not alone with that, that in voices and in the phonetic movement of air, to create a song, for instance, and to come out with your voice, there is like a vortex in the air.
Yeah.
And I thought this sopro was like that, like a phonetic vortex of voice.
And I think it is quite a, I mean, that's, I think, the fun and the sort of anxiety of painting is sometimes like you think for such a long time about it. But then the moment you paint, it's a very fast moment, especially with watercolor, because it dries, and that's what actually excites me about watercolor, that you have a very certain specific time frame to do the movement and to apply the paint, because then the paper and the water starts working as well. So it's really that sort of moment that you create that is so magical, which kind of accumulates all that in a couple minutes. And it's very exciting for me. I mean, that's the reason I go to the studio back every day. It's to have that moment, you know.
And to find out more.
Yes.
To go on. Yeah. Yesterday, for the first time, when we talked, you told me about Leonardo.
Because I was just so fascinated to start reading about all the studies of air and water, and how he was, you know, trying to put objects in water to understand how the water would flow around it, and calculating that. And I thought this is kind of, in a way, what I'm trying to do here, is to understand how things flow and how to measure, in a way, in a spatial way, how to measure air, how to measure water and the movement of it.
Yeah, and what you see in your paintings are these different form of movement. I think Leonardo knew like at least 67, 67 words for the movement of water. Different types, different forms of movement. And I think that's what you see in your paintings. Like naturally, you came there.
And it was for me because I just hadn't like read about it in that way, you know, that there was such specific studies, and it was just fascinating to me. Because when you find something that kind of translates in a way what you want to say, but you don't have the words,
Yeah.
and then you can read about it, it's so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And there again, I felt at home.
Yeah.
Because Rebecca Horn in her studio, she always has had the ancient masters and Goya specifically. And Pat Steer had Giotto in her studio, and now you come up with Leonardo. And I thought, wow, you are really the followers, the follower I was out for, you know? Because when when artists like that, with whom you have worked for more than 20 years, are on the leave, you desperately need somebody to go on, but also somebody who has something in her soul, who really can continue. And I think you really can.
I'll be honored to.
No, that's definitely, I mean, that's why I came and that's why I want to continue. No, that's really amazing. You talked about the instant. And I wanted to ask you something about that, and also maybe with that we can talk a little bit more about the titles. We are here in front of a huge landscape, which you called Me as a Landscape.
I mean, I think as I talked about the sort of the physical, the gestural part of the work and the size of the canvases, like sometimes like you just go into that space, you create a space around you. Obviously, when you start a canvas, it's the most beautiful challenge. When you get to the studio, you see the white giant canvas in front of you, and when you enter it, it's sort of like this relationship that you're entering the canvas. It's allowing you to create a space, and you put yourself in the middle somehow, and you create that space around you with the gestural, brushstroke or the mark making, creating layers of memories that kind of also reflect nature, the thinking of the wind, the thinking of the movement of the water. And so you are creating a constant sort of idea of landscape in a way around you, which is yourself. So the title comes from that.
I was also reminded of that Spanish word, la casa que hoy soy.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
The house I'm today. Because every day you are a different house. And you look out of your house in a different way. And you see things in a different way. When you're going smiling through the world, you get lots of smiles back. When you're not smiling to the world is looking differently. And so, is this instant you're painting linked to that way of how you are in yourself and what you will perceive?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think, every day is obviously a new challenge. I think that there is the perception of the self that you want to explore on a daily basis, and then also the relationship with the materials. So there's like kind of these two things that are always in dialogue. I did a series of watercolors for a couple of years, that were portraits. And they quite look like landscapes, actually, because I was always thinking, you know, when you think of a self-portrait, you're thinking of, you know, expressing what you want other people to see of you or what you want to see of yourself. And going into the idea of portrait, I went into the idea of the landscape that I feel is inside of a portrait. You know, like trying to express the outside, you're expressing the inside, but you're also kind of giving layers to your personality, but in a way you're building up that landscape. So I think that it really is intertwined. The portrait, the landscape, the idea of how you reflect. And it's about positioning yourself, maybe, inside the landscape that you create around you.
Yeah, that's interesting. And with the titles, do you want to inspire the viewer to go into a kind of similar inner landscape or to discover oneself?
I think so. I mean, the titles, I work on titles for quite a while after I paint. You know, sometimes they sort of start floating around while I'm working on a piece. Sometimes they come really after, and I like to take my time about it and let it sink in. And sometimes I just read, and I love poetry because for me, it has a very similar place than painting. And it's the fragmented, characteristic of it that I am drawn to, because obviously I'm not trying to describe something. I just want to create kind of a space for it to live. And I think that the titles is more an essay of like creating that space and giving some sort of hints, or just giving a kind of a little idea or feeling or understanding of like what I'm trying to express there, but not illustrating it, not closing it down, but rather opening up something more.
Yeah, that's what I felt also, in a certain way, to open up an inner space.
Exactly, yes.
And to look at contemplate your paintings from that inner space.
And I'm always like drawn, between the languages a little bit, and for a while I was trying to translate, and then I gave up translating, because obviously it's very hard to translate from German to Portuguese to English without illustrating it. So as you see, my titles kind of sometimes are composed of both languages or three languages, or because I feel like languages have their own life, obviously, and their own expressions that are not translatable, and I don't want to illustrate the idea. So I sort of like take fragments sometimes of Portuguese or German or English, and I leave it like that, and I stopped trying to do it all in one language or the other, because it doesn't really make sense to me, because obviously I grew up in Brazil and Germany, and now I live in the US, so those languages are all floating around me. I speak a lot of them and nothing really perfectly, so I decided to just be honest.
Yeah, I think that's for you and also for others like that. That sometimes we need to keep a word like that, which is also opening a space.
Right.
But with this inner space, I have to say it in German, for instance. I think of that Innenraum or Innenwelt, the word of Rilke. And Rilke is saying, if you want to see a tree, if you want to really see a tree, you have to pour inner space on the tree, and then you can see it. And I think that's what is always the event by looking on your paintings. You get all of a sudden very quiet and get like into another world.
Yeah, I mean that's like my intuition while I paint, and I hope that, you know, I can sort of pass that on to the viewer to create that space and create that opening so that I invite the viewer to step into that same space, as you say, you know, because I think it's just like obviously you paint alone, and then the moment that you show it in a space and you're inviting the viewer to be part of that experience, that's a whole, you know, second sort of step, you know, where you take it outside of the studio and you're putting it in a public space, and then you're letting everybody be part of it, which is very beautiful for me. It's a nice moment to be, because obviously we are very isolated in the studio and having that silent conversation with the painting constantly. So being able to sort of step outside of it, it's sometimes quite a relief too.
Yeah, I imagine. And maybe it is a relief also to go to these, to let yourself get into these, into the rhythm and into the dance of these flying lines. And these flying lines are so secret, and sometimes, because sometimes you might like there. What's the title of that? Can you help me?
Oh, sun, masked and dancing.
Yeah. And there you have the feeling that you see letters from an old manuscript, from a foreign culture. And sometimes it happens. We talked about that, I think. But it is more about this kind of freedom, and to give yourself to that freedom and to that chance system.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, like when I started painting as a child, and I think that the one thing that brings me back to the studio every day is this curiosity and this relationship with the painting, where you're always trying to find another layer and another layer where you can break into, you know, and how to expand it. And it's always sort of it's a challenge, and it's very exciting always, you know, like it's kind of creating a puzzle, trying to solve the puzzle, adding another piece to the puzzle, just to sort of bring yourself to another level again and again and again, because that's the challenge. That's why we go back to the studio, I guess.
Yeah. You're here. You did like a triptych. I think that is about exactly what is this kind of movement and this impulse to go on painting, and without nearly thinking intellectually about that, but to just give yourself to your painting.
I mean, I think when I started doing, you know, several like panels or papers, and when I try to, you know, it's kind of this idea that I don't want it to end. You know, it's like when you don't want the party to end, you don't want the night to end, you don't want the painting to end, because you just want to be able to step outside of the canvas almost and embrace the whole space. So when I worked on this triptych over here, that was quite interesting to me, because as you see this one, you know, it's 3 canvases, but they kind of are painted in the same sort of like fluid gesture and kind of connecting. And here, you know, I actually painted
Into the blue, no?
into the blue.
Yeah.
I painted 1 canvas, and then I placed a new canvas on the side, and instead of like, you know, painting them at the same time, I finished one, and then I sort of created a dialogue to that one. And that was new. in a way. Like that was a different way of dealing with two canvases or three, was more like how can I connect them without really painting them at the same time, but sort of like as if you're like commenting one with the other or sort of adding. It's like creating a partner for that
Yeah.
painting.
And here, when I was so triggered by this painting, by this, because you have like this, what you call in German, Binnenlandschaft. You have like this inner landscape. You look to a landscape, but there is included a landscape, and at the same time, you give it the title of into the blue, which again shows a dynamic.
Because it's more like inviting to step into a place, go inside a color, go inside a liquid realm, you know, going inside the sky, going inside some sort of a, color,
Diving.
diving or flying, or, you know, like it's just an invitation. And I think in that one, for me, the most exciting part was really like understanding how to create a partner for that painting, a relationship between two paintings that was not necessarily about connecting the dots really, but sort of creating a situation where it's clear that they belong together, but you don't really know why.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because maybe we never know why people or why things belong to each other. That's the big secret.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think for me that's like kind of a place that I'm very interested in right now. Is like how to connect different experiences or gestures or movement without forcing them necessarily to be one, but sort of allowing them to have each their own space.
Yeah. And just opposite here, we have this huge painting with the title of Bruma, which is in German Dunst, Nebel, so fog, mist. You used the term mist, you used it in this huge polyptychon,
Right.
which was called like a new mist, as if mist is maybe containing a promise.
Yes, I think also it sort of allows for the imagination to create all kinds of things inside of it, you know, like the fog, you know, obviously there's a fog over things and maybe hiding ideas or marks or memories or histories, but also the idea of like creating a new one, which is inviting new things to happen inside of it, not only for it to be covering certain things, but also maybe helping new things to grow. And Bruma, I didn't want to translate it because I thought Bruma has so much more to it than just mist. So I used it in Portuguese.
Yeah. So the phonetic,
Yeah. I mean,
the sound.
the sound, because that's also part of it that you don't want to disturb with the translation.
Yeah, exactly. But there is another sound here in Bruma. For me, at least, I mean, this is maybe like a spontaneous association. I saw the water lilies
Hiding.
hiding. Did you see them?
I mean, that's the process that for me is interesting when you allow your physical body in a way to create something that your mind is sometimes not completely aware of, but you kind of allow and invite, and you leave that space that you trust the memory of your body to create a painting, the memory, like your hand to create something that you sort of follow, but you leave that aspect of surprise in it, and you embrace it because you kind of, I mean, it's many years of trusting, you know, my hand and my eyes to do this. So after a while, you kind of just also allow it to build things and to create the spaces that are unexpected, which I think was the case with that painting, which was very exciting for me doing it because I kind of like, I drew on it for a long time and then I covered it all again, and I was leaving the chance something, because that's something that is also for me fascinating, is to kind of learn and play with the drying time, with the times of which, you know, pigment and which paint gets through, doesn't get through. Sometimes things dry first, dry later, and they create a different texture
Yeah, and oil is like
in oil.
is like drying so slowly.
Yeah, and that was, I think, the moment when I shifted back into oil painting, which for me was great, was to invite in all these new chances, you know, these new options of how to deal with time. Because the watercolors, as I said before, they have a very specific drying time, you know, and it's a challenge to sort of work with it and understand it.
And you can't correct them.
And you can't correct, you can't overpaint. You know, it's really the transparency is kind of the key, you know, in watercolors. When you start overdoing it, you destroy the painting, you kind of kill the breath of it. And with oil, there's all these new challenges because you can extend its life, you can kind of control it more, but also not. So I think that for me, like every day that I go into the studio, I kind of try to allow myself a new timing sometimes, you know, like sometimes I leave something to dry and I try to calculate a little bit how long it dries and where to step in back and do it always differently so that I get a different dialogue again and again.
Do you mind to tell maybe again a little bit that discovery, or this maybe the discovery of your courage to paint with oil? Because I mean that's also in the moment when we met, and I was so impressed by that because we were meeting together also in Paris, in the room of the watercolors, because you had the honor, and you were like of very few artists chosen to expose there.
I mean, I think for me, for many years, I only painted with water-based paints because, first of all, like coming from the performances I was creating that were dealing with water, with the idea of water, I obviously wanted to keep sort of that movement and that fluidity in the work, and also the performance aspect of it almost, you know, how fast it dries and how to deal with the timing, and to be very truthful to that moment, because as I was saying before, you can't really overpaint watercolor, you can't layer it and control it that much. It's really like something that you sort of train your hand to get to a point where you can deal with it in its time, you know, like you kind of give in and you deal with how the watercolor behaves. And oil for me, first of all, I think maybe it was very loaded, you know, historically speaking, and it was a bit massive and dense, and I didn't want to go into that space. I wanted to keep that lightness and the fluidity of water in the work. And then there was a moment where, you know, like you kind of explore all the options in certain things, and going to Paris, you know, and when I had that show that was a dialogue with the water lilies, and I had the chance to spend time in the space without people because the museum was closed for installation, and I could spend as much time as I wanted in the space, which is very rare. And with the water lilies, especially at the Orangerie, I started to look at the drawings and undertow almost of the painting and the mark making. And I wanted again to take out the drawing and deal with the drawing and the aspect of drawing and painting and what comes first, what comes after, and how to deal with that dialogue. And I decided to take the challenge, you know, and go into oil again because I wanted to kind of have a stronger mark making and a new challenge because I was drawing with pencils and watercolor pencils on top of canvas before. And obviously the oil and oil sticks, they are much stronger mark making so that you deal with the presence of the drawing more even.
Yeah, and also in Paris, you had the chance to go to the Sœur Roche.
Yeah,
No?
my favorite Sennelier
Yeah.
store, which is like a candy store for artists, obviously, you know, and I just, bought a whole suitcase full of sticks and went home and and first I was actually,
I mean, I don't know if the public gets it. There is a store in Paris, and behind there is a tradition of nearly 3 centuries. And they are producing these oil sticks for artists.
and they're very
to-
thick pigment sticks and they look really yummy.
Yeah. And so, and Janaina came to me and said to me, I'm so excited they will deliver now these huge boxes of oil sticks to New York, and I can't wait to figure out and to start painting and to really do this new experience. And I discovered by that how much you were coming from material, and how the material and the trying out of a new material and a new form of going with the material is also like the base of your painting in a way, which shows how much you have really that thinking hand, that there is like material and hand are going together, and from there you have like this impulse and this new impulse all the time to go further.
Because materials, I mean, they are, you know, you control them, but they also control you. You know, there is a response, and that's quite fascinating. That you're always being challenged by it. You know, like as much as you control and you learn how to apply, then if you kind of leave a little door open, the material gets back to you, and then you can build a relationship on that, which is great because then you kind of expand always, you know, your practice every day. Like but you have to listen to it also.
Yeah, and again you say listen. I mean, I don't want to be heavy with the sound, but I think there is a sound in painting. Of course, you can listen to paintings also as a viewer. There's a rhythm and there is a music in painting, and in yours it's especially strong. Yeah, I think so. Coming back to these kind of hidden references, what about The Wanderer? Why this title upstairs?
I mean, obviously there is a bit of Goethe in there.
Yeah.
But I think that, observation of nature and the idea of walking in nature, and I mean, that's where the title comes from, and what happens in your memory also, you know, like I think that we all have an accumulation of memories that have to do with the space you are, with what is happening. Obviously, nature's a lot of part of it, like the weather, if the sky, the sounds, and wonder relates to that, you know, like it's the listening in a way of nature and spending time and contemplation and how and what that leaves behind in us.
That's so funny, because your your explication is completely different from the experience I had when I was in front of it. And I was observing your paintings with Liliane together, and we went there, and I said, "The Wanderer, wow, this is Caspar David Friedrich." The Wanderer over the clouds.
Yeah.
And then we tried to make out like a rock, and also this verticality of Caspar David Friedrich and all that. And then I thought, I think we should stop that, because maybe we are putting on it lots of ideas and lots of associations which are not at all in the drawing. And so you confirm that
Yes,
this is not at all there. That's just amusing. Yeah. When you are upstairs and when you turn back from that painting of the Wanderer, and also turn back from the Sopro, you have behind a series of water drawings which are like an immense surprise also. Do you know why?
I mean, why it is a surprise to you?
Yeah,
I
or
don't know.
why could that be a surprise for you?
Well, for me, they were. I mean, there's obviously a different story behind it, which might be not the one you're thinking about, but I used to draw with pastels when I was a kid, and I used to mess up the whole house. And then I became completely traumatized, because obviously my mom wasn't really happy about that. And I kind of blocked out pastels from my life, and never wanted to touch it again, because I was breathing, eating pigment. Everything was full of pigment. And then
And that was at what age? 7?
7, 8, 9. My sister is here, she knows. And so I really blocked it out of my life and promised myself I would never touch it again, because it's really so porous and dusty. And then at some point, you know, recently I was like, you know, the other watercolor sticks, they don't have as many colors, you know, you have a very constrained number of different shades. In pastels, you get 100,000 shades. And I was like, why don't they make this in other? Anyway, so I went and bought pastels back and was trying to figure out how to deal with it, because it is very porous.
Mm-hmm.
It is dusty. You have to fix it and all that. So I was making experiments. And I decided to try to understand the material in a different way, and how to then sort of get the dust out or erase the dust. So I started combining the pastels with water, which is a bit of the opposite, because they're so dusty. So that's how those watercolors came about,
Yeah.
because they're basically little movements with pigments in water.
Yeah.
They're, you know, like they're drawings, but then I sort of whoosh them away with water, and then I move them with my hands, and then I try to control the dust inside the water so it stays there more.
That's amazing. But what you see also in the water and in the watercolors are like a movement of brush, no?
And I mean, in those water drawings, I mean, I really use also my hands, and I use big big brushes
Yeah.
that are really soaked in water, which is nice because it is as if you're thinking of the movement of water like in a river, like in a stream. That's why when I was telling you about like how fascinated I was to see the studies of Leonardo with like objects in streams, because for me that's what those kind of are, like studies of abstraction in the water
Yeah,
and shapes
exactly.
and how they move and
Yeah.
how to calculate their movement as if it was a stream.
Yes. Yes. But it is also a very fine stream. And I looked at that yesterday night with Christina. And what we were especially observing was that you're like taking the brush, and the brush is like very little, nearly dry in a certain way, so that you can do like a movement in a circle, which then comes to an end, like really fading away sound. And all of a sudden you have the feeling, and it's not only a feeling, it's it's the result of observation. It's that the painting is turning around. The tiny, very, very delicate traces of the brush are like marking a space. And in fact, the painting is to show the space.
Yeah, and I think that's the fascination of, the material, like the ink on paper or the like pigment water on paper, is that you have the absorption of the paper and you kind of deal with like what are you leaving out of the background to come forward. And those are like little breathing spaces, and you kind of control that with the amount of water that you soak the brush with.
Yes, exactly, the breathing spaces, as we said together in the title of the Atemräume.
Yeah.
And also I think what you have here, and maybe this is like really for the future to think about that, but strangely you are already there. And that is always your enormous quality, that you go by instinct. I mean, you were like, for lots of times, you were like already working with all the richness of differentiation of movement of Leonardo. It's now that you discover it's in a certain way like after looking to it. And what I think is here that we might look together also to Chinese paintings, and what François Cheng is like describing in his wonderful book on painting, when he is describing this Chinese phenomenon which is called flying white.
Blanc volant.
Le blanc volant. And I think that's what you have here already. And maybe it will be interesting to read something about that together afterwards and to talk about that more. Or maybe we shouldn't. It's open. But what I see is that. And this is like, for me, the deepest secret, and also the highest accomplishment of painting. When you come to this reverse of showing the space.
Yeah, and I think that's the, when you, like it's almost like exercising an instrument. You're playing something every day until you're able to give it lightness, to kind of be able to like play a tune in one go without breaking it up, without trying it again, so you can actually let it sort of breathe. And I think with that, the brushstroke is a magical moment, and I think it takes years sometimes until you can kind of do the brushstroke the way it should be, you know, without fixing it or without going over it, because then obviously you're killing it. If you know, retry, like I think that's the moment like we all kind of aim for, is to be able to sort of do the strokes in a way that it can continue and that it has its own voice and leaves the spaces open.
Exactly, like a musician,
Yeah.
like someone who is like taking the bow to the cello, no?
That's why, like, I do think it has a lot, like, it's a very similar, it's an instrument, you know, that you play
Yeah.
until you manage to sort of let it kind of flow.